In my first year at college, when I was finding my way as a young woman in a new environment, I had to chuckle at myself. After growing up in the same tiny house in the same small town for 18 years, I moved to a big city in hopes of finding a truer sense of my identity, separate from people who were always telling me who I was or who I should be. But I had a chuckle on the evening I went to self-defense class, then ran directly across the athletic field to the dance studio. In the self-defense class, I learned how to fight for my life. In the dance studio, I learned a very feminine Scottish national dance. Who was I? Full of feminine grace or a mean fighting machine? What kind of woman was this Dina becoming? I had not yet read Walt Whitman, who wrote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." If each human being contains multitudes, which lens do we use to view ourselves or to view others? Perhaps we should use a kaleidoscope and find joy in the changing patterns and colors held up to the light. Perhaps we should consider each person's identity as a kaleidoscope and consider that they are showing us at any given time only one facet of their beauty. You know the object I'm talking about, right? That tube containing mirrors, pieces of colored glass or paper. You hold it up to the eye, you look at a source of light, and when you turn it, then you can see these beautiful shapes and patterns moving in front of your eyes. Well, similarly, various aspects of our identity reflect in changing patterns of color when held up to the light. In one room, in my story, I was a mean fighting machine, and in the other room, I was a delicate dancer. Just a couple of facets of identity. In my small town, everyone knew me. In the big city, I could be anyone I wanted to be. Or could I? Identity as a kaleidoscope is a different way of thinking about who we are. It goes against the grain. It goes against the definition of identity. The word identity comes from the Latin identitas, from idem, meaning same, and etos, indicating a state of being. Same being. Identity usually means the set of characteristics by which a person or thing is definitively recognizable or known. I like the solidity of that definition. I could build a house on that rock. But in real life, our identity contains multitudes. And the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we can find joy in it. Identity includes so many things. What we do for work, our role in different relationships, our hobbies and passions, the generation we come from, our history and lineage, how we look, our religious and political beliefs and values, our families, the communities where we belong. Think of all the different things you've done for work. I've been a babysitter, a cleaning lady, a librarian's assistant, a farmer's apprentice, a cook, a camp counselor, a supervisor of admissions at a university, a shiatsu therapist, a minister. All these work experiences are part of who I am, some more meaningful than others, depending on my sense of vocation or purpose in the work. Think of your roles in relationships. Are you a sibling, a spouse or partner, a parent, an adult child, a cousin, an ex-spouse or partner? Are you a friend, an enemy, a lover? Who are you when you lose the other person in that relationship? Am I still a daughter, even though both of my parents have died? Think about your lineage, if you can know it. Who are your people? Where did they come from, and how did they get here? Why might you know more about one side of the family than the other? Why might you care more about one side than another? Why might it be impossible to know your ancestors all the way back? What about your volunteer roles? I know many of you volunteer for worthy causes, whether it be as literacy tutors or working in voter registration drives. Is your volunteer role part of your identity? It could be, because through that activity and in that context, you are living out your values. What about your hobbies or passions? I garden, so does that make me a gardener? Oh yes, it does. Gardening is dug so deeply into my identity, I'm not apologizing for the pun, that in some distant year in the future, when my body tells me I can no longer garden, I may not know who I am. The kaleidoscope turns by our own hands or by the circumstances around us. Some aspects of identity change throughout our lives, and that adaptability can be a source of resilience in times of turmoil. Why do we assume that we have to be who we've always been? Bruce Marshall wrote in his book called In Later Years, identity has to do with one's sense of self. It grounds us in the world. The trouble is, identity changes, just like everything else. Once we think we've got ourselves figured out, conditions change, and we have to amend our sense of who we are again. Marshall suggests, perhaps my identity is grounded in how I look, but that changes by or against our will. Perhaps my identity is tied up with what I can do. Well, that changes as well through aging, illness, or injury. We might be born with a condition that deteriorates over the years. We might be temporarily able-bodied or have one or more disabilities that cause us to move through the world in another way. We face barriers in the world based on the kaleidoscope of our identities and the oppression that is active in society. Many people with disabilities say their body is not the problem, it's the barriers in the world, physical and attitudinal, that set limits on their access. That is the problem. Marshall wrote, sometimes too, we are surprised by how we react to a situation and what it reveals to us about ourselves. We might say, I didn't know that I had that in me. I didn't realize that is part of who I am. When did you discover that you had something in you that you didn't expect? What was the situation that brought that out in you? Was the thing you had in you or the situation positive or negative or more complex? Did you claim that part of you or discard it? Many survivors of trauma decide to identify as more than the traumatic experience they had in the past. They might say about the past, I will not let that define me. As the kaleidoscope turns, identity brings meaning to our lives as we claim it, as we create it, and as we are influenced by our social context. Here's another aspect of identity. In which social generation are you located? Silent generation, baby boomer, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z? How does that social generation influence your personality or your worldview? In the recent book, Generations by Jean Twenge, she claims, cultural change leads to generational change, as each generation effectively grows up in a different culture. She wrote, no one has a choice in the year in which they were born. We all belong to a generation. For some, it fits like a familiar glove, enclosing us in the warm, fleece-like protection of solidity with our birthmates, solidarity with our birthmates. For others, generation is more like an itchy sweater, annoying in its overgeneralizations and misunderstandings of who we feel we are. But for many, it is both, wonderful in its sense of common experience and support, but not as wonderful when it's weaponized as an insult. Marshall wrote, in modern Western society, identity derives primarily from one's sense of self as an individual. What I look like, what I can do, the accomplishments that I can claim, the roles I play in everyday life, the resources I control, the power that I can exert. We may also derive a sense of self from the communities in which we participate, but such collective identity in the Western world is usually secondary. He continues, while my identity is influenced by my family, the town in which I live, my faith community, my ethnic heritage, and my football team, personal identity tends to weigh more heavily than the communal identity. I would have to amend the above to say, unless your identity includes being part of an oppressed race, gender, sexual orientation, class, religion, ethnicity, etc., because then you are almost constantly in relationship to the social context. And then the communal identity, which empowers you, is your survival and your saving grace. And then there's the onion theory of identity. This is like I have no research on this. I just call it the onion theory. When you're peeling away the layers of who you are to find out who you really are at the center, which of course is also heavily influenced by society. At our worship associate retreat, someone shared a saying that goes, queer people don't grow up as themselves. They grow up as a version of themselves that they've learned in order to protect themselves. And the work of adulthood is to figure out what is actually you and what you have learned to protect yourself. Peeling away those layers. Layers of protection, layers of vulnerability are much on our minds and hearts these days. Layers of vulnerability, layers of protection are all wrapped up in identity. The lived experience of identity in our bodies holds the possibility for vast and joyous celebration and connection with others. Yet identity can also be a target, elicit fear, and require camouflage for survival. The work of our spiritual community here at First Church is to create space for people to thrive in the multitudes of identities that they possess. Our work is to create an environment of trust where people can choose whether, when, and how to peel away the layers and discover who they really are. Our work in relationship is to inhabit what comes up for us, to confront our assumptions, to reduce harm, to see and hear people for who they are as themselves. Reclaiming identity while in community is a theme in the following short poems by Unitarian Universalists. Susan Mankerseal's poem, Red Skin. Whenever I swim in the ocean for any bit of time, she emerges with me, long hair streaming, red of the red skin, brown of the oppressed, flowing down my body like water. They ask, who am I to be so dark? She has always been here, though you wouldn't see. She walks with me for a while, proud and beautiful. Don't forget me, she says, and we promise one more time. Kristen Harper's poem, I Too Am Beautiful. Look at me. I am black and you are white, but I too am beautiful. Look at my face, my hair, my clothes. Aren't they worthy of your gaze? Look at my walk, the way my hips sway to the music in my soul, the way my proud neck tilts toward the sun. Yes, look at me. Look at my darkness. It contains light and love, rebirth and growth. Look at my pain. Don't look away. Look at the way you see me. I am human. I have tears and fears. I have laughter and joy. Look at me and walk with me. I too am beautiful. And finally, Mitra Jafarzade's poem, An American Flag Upon My Tasbih. It is a custom, superstition, decoration to hang prayer beads from the rear view mirror. Not broken bodies of long ago prophets, not agony in the name of God, not sculpted, miniaturized terror, just beads. Mine are brown like coffee beans, smooth for running through fingers. Hung for decor, they tell those who would decode something Middle Eastern. Not for faith, for culture. So it is no sacrilege that the smooth brown beads break their rhythm for a cold metal rectangle of red, white, and blue. An announcement, an American drives this car. When I called, I said, don't wear black today, it makes you look too ethnic. Put away your turtlenecks, choose your pink Izod. He said, I told your sister the same, and stay away from airports. Drive if you have to be somewhere. You, he said, are white enough. You don't have to worry. Then he said, but you do have your American flag on your Tasbih. Identity can be used positively or negatively. Identity can be used to serve love and connection, to alleviate human suffering, to include others in a world of divisiveness. Identity can be used to hate, to punish, to exalt some and to exclude others. We know we are in a time of heightened polarization in society in which identity politics are being used in a life and death manner. Identity politics could be as simple as the fact that everyone has an identity that influences their worldview. When we use politics in service of our identity, we are then using the power of our worldview to influence others. Nothing really wrong with that, but of late, it is so much more than that. Author Brian Doyle wrote, "Look, I know all too well that the story of the world is entropy. Things fly apart, we sicken, we fail, we grow weary, we divorce, we are hammered and hounded by loss and accidents and tragedies. We slide away into the dark oceans behind the stars. But I also know that we are carved of immense, confusing holiness, that the whole point for us is grace under duress. And that you either take a flying leap at nonsensical, illogical, unreasonable ideas like marriage and marathons and democracy and divinity, or you huddle behind the brooding wall. Friends, let us remember this week in particular that we are large, we contain multitudes. Honor the joy of your identities with each turn of that kaleidoscope. For in all your colors and patterns, you are beautiful. You are sacred. You are made of immense holiness, every single one of you. Remember that violence is not the answer. Remember, the whole point for us is grace under duress. May you be held, may you be whole, may love be at the center of all we say and do. May it be so.